So things we touched on in class today, a little bit more detail on a few of our exercises. So I want you to pay attention to the overhead reach. When you're reaching up, you're pulling apart, but you want to be reaching up with your arms as much as you can so that you straighten both elbows. Keep both elbows straight, and then you can reach back a little bit. But first, when you reach up, pulling your arms up as high as you can as you pull apart, that gives you something to pull down against with your shoulder blades, and externally rotate your arms at the shoulder blades against. So don't be doing one elbow slightly bent. Reach up as high as you can to get them to straighten out. And then you'll balance out how much they're reaching up by how well you pull the shoulder blades down and how well you externally rotate. So it's good, even if one arm feels like it's being pulled up higher with straight elbows, then you work hard where you really are weak in the shoulder blade retraction and try and balance that out in external rotation. And then when you reach back over your head, be aware of how much that reaching back flares your ribs and how much you can correct that flare of the ribs with exhalation and tucking your buttock under. Okay initially to flare a lot to get at the tightness in your shoulders, but start to back off so that you're not flaring your ribs as much, and try and bring those ribs down, tuck the pelvis under, and play with head coming back, shoulders coming back, ribs coming down, and how they can affect that upper back rigid curve from above and below. So play with that. And then we talked about walking with the pole over your head. You want to reach up and you want to reach forward with your leg and your pelvis coming together. You don't want to have your pelvis come back and reach forward with your leg. So that when you step forward, if this is your midline here, the hip and pelvis is reaching in front as much as the shoulders are rotating behind. So center line, pelvis is in front with the leg as much as the shoulder and arm are back. So you've got a counterbalanced rotation of your shoulders compared to the rotation of the pelvis forward. And yes, be careful that your pelvis isn't back, rotating back as your leg comes forward. They're both coming forward together, and you feel the torsion through your lower abdomen and the connection of your lower body through the ribs to the upper body with the counter rotation. Okay, there's a little more detail to that. You don't want your pelvis to come too far forward, and as your leg comes forward, there should be external rotation of the hip at the pelvis as the pelvis comes forward, and then as your leg extends back, there should be internal rotation of the hip at the pelvis. And the pelvis rotates only a little bit. The reach of the leg is going to happen more, but we don't want the pelvis coming back as the leg goes forward. So be aware of that. So side lying. Sorry. I wanted you to be aware of your pushing down of your leg and your arm, like you're spreading apart of your top arm and leg, is helping you take the sag this way out of your body to straight up and down. So that's what your pushing apart does. Pushing away from you with the thigh and the elbow helps you with your front to back flare. So pushing back with your, or pushing forward with your elbow helps your ribs come down. Pushing forward with your thigh into the mat helps your pelvis come up. So pelvis up, ribs down, breathing in and filling. That helps you fill that abdominal cylinder. The string on top of your head pulling you lengthwise upwards and pulling you lengthwise downwards lengthens the spine, makes it much easier to fill that abdominal cylinder. Same thing with pushing down. It's helping you take the sag out and align the ribs and pelvis from a side to side perspective. Gives you that more three-dimensional alignment. And then that's what you want to rotate back and forth while you're doing that. And when you get really good at thinking about that all the time, you're thinking about that as you roll, you're pushing back, and that pushing back and pushing out helps bring your shoulder up on to the arm and keeps that shoulder centered as opposed to slack, which this rotation of your trunk onto your shoulder, it's tough to know what is stacked unless as you're coming down, you're pushing apart and pushing away to load that shoulder and keep it upright as you come over it instead of letting it slack and then try and correct it from there. The other struggles we had today, we were doing the pushing your hands into the mat, reaching with your fingers, spreading your fingers, pushing away, reaching with your shoulder blades up towards the ceiling, spreading your shoulders apart. As you're pushing with your hands, you're also kind of reaching with your elbows down in towards the mat to help you fire the serratus anterior that wraps around from the front of the shoulder blade to the front of the ribs and the back of the shoulder blade. So you're not firing your pecs, you're using your shoulder girdle muscles in the back that help you bring the rib cage back up into the shoulder blades. So your shoulder blade push up for the serratus anterior, and then you can keep your shoulder blades or your ribs flush with your shoulder blades, and then rock forwards and backwards, side to side, come up into bear. In bear, you can lift one leg, lift the other leg, lift one arm, lift the other arm. All those are going to strengthen that connection. Even crawling forwards and backwards, strengthen the connection between the shoulder blade and the rib cage, which makes it much easier to do the stuff we did in prone position, which would be on your forearms and your thighs. Like, you really have to have good strength of connection between your shoulder blades and your rib cage in order for you to hold your ribs in an exhalation position parallel with the upward facing pelvis. Like, that can be really, really difficult if your shoulder blades are winging. So it's developing that strength that's going to help you with these prone positions here and here. And then you want some good hip mobility so you can keep the tuck of your pelvis, which is glutes and hamstrings involved in internal rotation of your hips. Okay, and flattening out that lower back, having the ribs come down, retracting your chins. Again, it has a lot to do with the serratus anterior. And I think that might be it. We did a little bit of talking about something a little bit more advanced from the sideline position. So when you're in this position, it's a contralateral pattern, similar to the walking pattern, but this thigh pushing down, the hip is externally rotation. This leg on top is going to be internal hip rotation. So this hip internally rotating as the pelvis rotates over this downside hip. This is externally rotating, this is internally rotating. This top arm is externally rotating, just like the contralateral or opposite thigh and hip. And this downside arm is internally rotating. So as we go from low oblique sit to high oblique sit to up to quadruped, all those things are happening. This is externally rotating, this is externally rotating, this is internally rotating, this is internally rotating. So you can play with that, and if you exaggerate that, that's going to help give you more connection in a third dimension, which makes things happen smoother and easier, and you don't get trapped in these transitional positions. Good?